Um, this is how I'm going to start it off, fantasy owners, today with the Week 6 and Week 7 edition of the Fantasy Football Stock Report. Have you ever had a fantasy week where it's just like fantasy nirvana? It's complete and utter excitement. Your players' points are going up and up and up every single time. You set the perfect lineup based on whether it's projection or your gut feeling or whatever. You just have an awesome week. Well, I hope y'all had that last week because I did. I probably put up one of my highest point totals that I have ever had, ever. I had 144 points this week with guys like Andy Dalton, Marshawn Lynch, Vernon Davis, Justin Blackman, Keenan Allen. So I got to say, if your starting guys aren't doing well for you, if bye weeks are affecting you, at least to me, there's always somebody out there on the waiver wire that you can get that could be a long-term option or a plug-in option, whatever, to still keep your season going. So take it from me, the guys are out there to help you succeed. With that said, welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Football Stock Report. Chris Pearson here with you for another edition, the Week 6 recap and the Week 7 preview. Didn't get a lot of response. Actually, I didn't really get any response from you guys regarding what format I should really do from here on out. But I personally, based on what I have seen and what I've done, I really like to do the position breakdowns. Again, I think it takes up less time, gives me a chance to really go in depth each on position by position rather than go game by game. So that's how I'm going to do it from here on out. I really like to do that format in the past. I think I even did that format when I did the podcast on Blog Talk Radio. So I think I'm going to do it that way from now on. So with that being said, we're going to start off with quarterbacks. And really, though, I just want to say the overarching story from this week, was a lot of players getting hurt, a lot of players suffering some big players that we usually rely on every single week got hit with some injuries this week. We're going to obviously address those. We're going to talk about that. As I said in the update, we got injuries, we got waivers, we got positional breakdowns. Seriously, if you've not seen the video or heard that Patriots call of that touchdown against the Saints, you have got to hear it. It is one of the. It's funny because it's caught up in the moment excitement. But it is just one of the most insane things that I've ever heard. Unicorn, show ponies, where's the beef? It's just so random that it's funny. So I really recommend you guys seeing that. It's pretty cool stuff. So okay. Anywho, quarterbacks from Week 6 and moving in forward to Week 7. The top quarterback for the week, at least in CBS Sports leagues, was Cam Newton. But this was kind of understandable because Newton had such a really good matchup this week, going up against a Minnesota defense that really has not been very stellar all year. So this was a great week for Newton to shine with this matchup. He went 20 of 26 for 242 yards with 3 scores. He also rushed for a score, so that was a huge week. He had 36 points in standard leagues. So obviously, and this week he's just got a good matchup. Also, I think you can continue to roll with Cam this week. He's going up against the Rams. Now, granted, the Rams, don't be fooled by the Rams who put up a lot of points on the Texans last week. The Texans' offensive situation is awful right now. Obviously, with Matt Schaub being hurt. And by the way, I just want to address one thing on the Matt Schaub situation. I don't care how bad your team is. I don't care what you're going through. I don't care, whatever the situation is. I don't care if he's trying to pick 6 in 4 straight, 5 straight, 6 straight games. When a player is hurt on the field, you do not boo them. Okay, seriously, I'm sorry, you do not cheer. You do not cheer a player when he is hurt. I don't care who that player is. That was really classless and tasteless by the Houston fans. I understand that he's not doing good things for you. I also don't agree with the people who are trespassing outside Matt Schaub's house, trying to chase him down for whatever reason to chant things at him because he's being, a frustrated player. Get a life. Just if you're that into your team situation, go out there and quarterback yourself. I mean, if you think you can do better than Matt Schaub or TJ Yates or Case Keenum, go out there and do it yourself. Because honestly, you're not doing yourself any favors. You're doing a disservice to everyone who actually is paid there to watch the game and enjoy the game. You're not benefiting yourself. So I didn't get that at all. I didn't get there was another situation where a player in Arizona was hurt, and the fans during that time were doing the wave. I mean, just be respectful. That's all I ask. Be respectful of what's going on the field. Be respectful. Anywho, so as like I was saying, though, with Houston, don't take the Rams beating Houston that bad as a sign that the Rams offense is really that good. Most of their points were scored by their defense because the Houston offense was turning the ball over a lot. So the Rams offense is still a huge question mark. It looks like they've got the running back situation settled now with Zach Stacy. But, so many wide receivers, who's going to get the bulk of the work? Is it Austin Pettis? Is it Cook? Is it, Givens, Tavon Austin? Too many mouths to feed. And Sam Bradford doesn't seem to find them all the time. So I really like Newton this week still. If you're, this week we've got the Saints and the Raiders on a bye. So if you don't have Drew Brees, if you don't have Terrell Pryor, and if you are needing either a 1 week fill-in or somebody who's plugging in real quick, I really like Cam Newton this week. I think you can roll with him as a solid starting option this week. Another guy I really like this week that is starting to come on really strong, and actually who I honestly think should be the starter for the Philadelphia Eagles going forward, is Nick Foles. I think some people thought, oh, he can't run Chip Kelly's offense. It's tailored toward Michael Vick. Well, you know what? Foles just proved everybody wrong because he clearly showed that he can compete in this offense and run it very well. He was 22 of 31 for 296. That was one of the better yardage performances by any quarterback this week. 3 touchdowns again. He also rushed for 1, so he had a very similar day to Newton. So, Chip Kelly's offense is high octane, and Philly can do that. They were playing Tampa, which Tampa's defense not good, but apparently can be beat on by a really good offense. So, again, if you're struggling at quarterback this week, if you don't have Drew Brees, if he's by chance out there on waivers, Nick Foles is a great fill-in option. He's playing Dallas this week. The Dallas defense has not exactly been great this season. They got rolled over by Denver a couple weeks ago, so they have their kind of share of hits and misses. I certainly think Foles is a strong number 2 with upside. Definitely, though, a great serviceable bye week option for you. You can plug in your lineups this week. Also having an impressive week, and I got this guy off waivers because he had a great matchup this week, was Andy Dalton of Cincinnati. Definitely one of his best week of the season by far. Had the 4th most points, but he keep it up 30 points in a CBS Standard League. That is normally for Dalton not normal, but with that great matchup against Buffalo, we took advantage of that. I didn't have Matt Ryan last week, so I got Dalton off waivers, and boy, I might even keep him as my backup because since Matt Ryan now doesn't have Julio Jones in Atlanta, his options are less limited. So Dalton could be a great guy to fill in as a number 2 backup on your bench. He went 26 of 40 for 337, 3 touchdowns, had a pick, but still a great week by Dalton standards, and just a great performance by Andy Dalton. This week going up against Detroit, again, it's a nice matchup, but again, the Lions can also be strong at times. The Lions D did a good job on Cleveland this past week. So again, I can only rate Dalton as more of a number 2, but certainly again, if you don't have Drew Brees this week, if you don't have Terrell Pryor, I think certainly he could be a decent bye week fill-in option for you this week, just like I had to use him for last week. Thad Lewis of Buffalo, quite surprised by his performance. I honestly thought that Buffalo's, all the guys behind E.J. Manuel at quarterback, I didn't expect him to be this good. I mean, this was a guy that was literally signed off the street. He was on the practice squad or something like that. And yet he actually had a decent day. 19 of 32, 216, 2 touchdowns. He also rushed for 1. So he had 25 points in a CBS league. So again, a decent day, nothing too flashy, but any way you can get points in fantasy is decent. So again, I wouldn't rate him as a must-start option against Miami this week. I would certainly say is a decent number 2, number 3 fill-in option for a bye week fill-in if he's out there in your league. He's the top quarterback free agent in mine right now, so if he's out there in your league, you can certainly take a chance on him. I mean, if you're desperate, I would take some other guys over him as better options, but if other guys are out there. Jay Cutler, great matchup for Jay Cutler this week, going up against the Redskins. He had 24 points last week. I love Jay Cutler's matchup this week. That's a great option for you. Don't expect a repeat from Joe Flacco this week. Yeah, he had 23 points last week, but he's going up against Pittsburgh this week. Pittsburgh's defense has been strong this year. They just shut down Geno Smith. So I don't like Joe Flacco this week. Obviously, I don't like Sam Bradford going up against that Carolina defense. Don't like him. Now, Mike Glennon of Tampa Bay, he's another intriguing free agent that could be out there in your league. Going up against the Falcons, last week, 26 of 43, a lot of passing attempts for Glennon, but 273 yards, 2 scores, 22 points. I mean, it looks like right now Tampa Bay is making the right decision here to get rid of Josh Freeman and bring Glennon in as the starter in Tampa Bay. Now, it hasn't translated any wins yet, but I think eventually that will come for Tampa Bay. So, at least if you're putting up good points, if you're putting up good yardage, then you could be a serviceable quarterback. So, again, I like him more of as number 2, maybe with some upside. But again, a great bye week fill-in for you if you're desperate, if you're in need at quarterback. Mike Glennon could be a guy that you plug in for some good numbers for you because Atlanta's defense really banged up this year. And again, their offense is going to try to keep up because Matt Ryan doesn't have Julio Jones to throw to anymore. Roddy White could be out for that game as well. So some things to like about Mike Glennon this week. Drew Brees had 20 points, but remember you don't have him this week because he's on the bye week, so make sure you keep Drew Brees reserved on your bench. After that, it's a pretty big drop-off. But again, I expect bounce-back weeks from some guys this week. Brandon Weeden, I don't like him against Green Bay this week. Yeah, again, he's got talent there with Gordon and Cameron at wideout and tight end, but I don't like the matchup this week for Brandon Weeden. Look, Cleveland, the only reason that Cleveland was really successful was because Brian Hoyer was pulling off the win to start a bit. Now he's done for the year. Now it's back to Weeden, and Cleveland might just be struggling again. So I don't like Brandon Weeden this week. Colin Kaepernick going up against Tennessee. That's a tough matchup this week as well. But Cap had 19 points last week. You probably can't afford to sit Kaepernick, so you're probably starting him. Carson Palmer going up against Seattle on Thursday night. That's a really tough matchup, although it is at Arizona. So, again, I can only look at Palmer as a number 2 option, but maybe the Cards are going to play better at home in this one. Maybe they're going to really be an impressive play. So maybe you can put Palmer in as a number 2 guy or, again, another bye week fill-in for you. And then you look at guys, Aaron Rodgers, obviously, you're going to keep rolling with him. Now, the only downside about Rodgers, obviously, is that his receiving core is now banged up. He won't have Randall Cobb for 6 to 8 weeks because of that broken fibula. He won't have James Jones possibly. So Jordy Nelson will have to step up. Jermichael Finley will have to step up. These other guys behind him, these deep depth guys. So Aaron Rodgers, while he's a little bit tempered because his weapons are out, I think you can still use him this week. Peyton Manning is going to have a big week this week. He's going up against his former team. He only had 17 points last week. And I say only because, again, we expect bigger numbers from Peyton Manning. But he's going to have a big week this week. You can safely start Peyton. Big Ben against Baltimore. Not a great matchup. I'm not too fond of him this week. Definitely can still start Russell Wilson. Definitely start Phillip Rivers against Jacksonville. Tom Brady against the Jets. Even though he likely won't have Amendola this week, you can still start him. He finds a way to get to his weapons. Again, after that, it's a pretty big drop-off. RG3 against Chicago, tough matchup. But again, I don't think you can afford to sit in. More of a number 2 option this week for me. Now, Matt Castle will not be starting for Minnesota. The report is out that Josh Freeman will be starting for Minnesota this week. So again, if you need a guy to maybe plug in late, Josh Freeman would be the guy I think that maybe you could put in as number 2. Now, obviously, you might want to take a chance right away just to see what happens with Minnesota, but never see what happens there. Tony Romo against Philly, great matchup. I love Tony Romo this week. You can definitely roll with him. Same for Eli Manning against Minnesota. They'll be more of a number 2, but again, considering what Carolina just did in Minnesota, maybe Eli Manning can do the same thing with, if at least as long as he tempers down on the turnovers, you can go with that. Other than that, Chad Henne, Matt Schaub, Alex Smith, these aren't elite options for you. They're only desperation plays. Alex Smith against Houston obviously is intriguing because Houston's defense has been destroyed of late. So, so obviously maybe Alex Smith you could plug in as a number 2. And then Andrew Luck going up against Denver. I don't know. Again, more of a number 2. I don't love the matchup this week. Other than that, it's a big drop-off. Okay. Moving on now to the running backs. Oh, Overman is currently airing on ESPN News. Okay. There we go. All right, so on to the running backs based on what they did last week and what we're looking forward to this week. Top running back for the week was Knowshon Moreno. Clearly, he has established himself as the number 1 back in Denver. It was a muddy mess going into the season. Who was going to be the guy? They drafted Monty Ball. We thought he'd be the guy. That didn't happen. Ronnie Hillman got pushed back. They were doing rock, paper, scissors at some point during the season, but now it's clear that Moreno has established himself as the running back to own in Denver. Last week, 15 carries for 42 yards with 3 scores. He also had 7 receptions for 62 yards. So he's kind of, again, that dual threat running back that I personally love to have. You know, in that same vein as Danny Woodhead, Darren Sproles, Joyke Bell, Jacquizz Rodgers, all these guys, Chris Obanaya in Cleveland, all these guys that have that dual threat ability. I love these guys. Not only are they good for PPR leagues, but if they get consistent enough targets, they can become your number 2 running back. So I really like Knowshon Moreno this week. Again, going up against the Colts, the Colts can be run on. Their run defense has not been stellar. Now, their defense as a whole this year has actually been pretty decent. They're surprisingly, one of the better units in the league. They didn't exactly give up a whole lot to San Diego last week, except for Ryan Matthews going off and Keenan Allen going off. So that was really the big thing for them. But if they can do that, then Moreno should have a good week this week. You can keep rolling with Moreno as a number 1, number 2 back for you. Obviously, Marshawn Lynch, beast mode has been huge every week. You're gonna keep your stud in there. Now, there is a bit of a concern with Lynch is that he's probable with a hip injury. But so far, it looks like all signs are he is going to play on Thursday. But just keep that in mind. Just keep tabs on Lynch's status. I certainly am because I own Marshawn Lynch. But it looks like he's going to play Thursday, so just keep that in mind, though. Monitor his status right up until kickoff. Jamal Charles, great matchup this week going up against the Texans. You want to keep rolling with Jamal Charles this week. He had 24 points last week, 2 touchdowns. You want to keep rolling with him. The Out of Nowhere Award at running back goes to Brandon Jacobs. I can't remember the last time I said that name on this show. Honestly, it has been a long time since Brandon Jacobs has been fantasy relevant, but now it certainly looks like the Giants, oh my gosh, I found a running game. Shocker! Really, this was an out-of-nowhere performance. 22 carries, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns for 22 fantasy points. It was just absolutely stunning to see him pull this off. Now, going up against that Vikings defense this week, the question is going to be, are they going to do what Carolina did and crush them with the pass, or are they going to try to get Jacobs more involved and focus on the run? I don't want to say Jacobs is a must-start option, but certainly he is a guy you can pick up off waivers. Maybe you plug him in as a number 2, number 3 play, or if you don't have Darren Sproles this week, or any of the Raiders running backs like McFadden, or something like that, I think Jacobs is certainly a guy who can plug in for a spot start and be a great option for you this week. I really like Brandon Jacobs, at least in the good matchups. We'll see if this trend continues where he gets the bulk of the work, but for now, it looks like he's going to be fed the rock a lot in that Giants backfield. Really like Brandon Jacobs' matchup this week. Stevan Ridley of New England, it looks like all his health issues are behind him. It looks like the fumbling issues are behind him. There's it looks like there's not going to worry about Brandon Bolden or LeGarrette Blount anymore. If you had kept faith in Stevan Ridley, you were rewarded this week. Tough matchup going up against the Jets this week, but I don't think you can afford to sit Stevan Ridley. I think you keep rolling with him. Arian Foster, 19 points last week, but tough matchup with the Chiefs this week. But again, can't afford to sit Arian Foster. He's just too good. Reggie Bush, great week again this week, 18 fantasy points. Keep rolling with him. Mike Tolbert of Carolina. I don't know. Carolina's backfield has always seemed to confuse me and really frustrate me. Is it going to be D'Angelo Williams? Now, Jonathan Stewart has not played this season because of his ankle issues, but he could be coming back at least in a couple weeks. So that means Mike Tolbert now is getting some work. He had 8 carries for 27 yards and a score, plus he had 2 catches for 20 yards and a score, so he had 16 fantasy points. But then the question becomes, is Tolbert fantasy relevant going forward? And honestly, I would say maybe. I mean, I can only see him as more of a flex play. I can't really recommend him as a number 2 back because this is the first time all year really that Tolbert has broken out and had a really good week. So I don't want to say he's a number 2 guy just yet. Maybe more of a number 3 or a flex play for you this week. Or again, if you don't have a Darren Sproles, if you don't have McFadden, maybe you can plug him in at that spot. But for now, I would just say maybe kind of take a wait-and-see approach. Definitely, I think someone you can put on your scout team to see if this trend continues going forward with Mike Tolbert. But for now, I can't recommend him as a plug-in right away. More of a flex play going forward until see if this trend continues. Giovanni Bernard, keep rolling with him. I love he started. The thing about Bernard is he doesn't get a lot of carries on the ground. He only had 15 carries for 28 yards, but he makes his work again like Danny Woodhead out of the passing game. 6 catches for 72 yards, so he still had 15 fantasy points. You need to keep rolling with him this week. I really like Giovanni Bernard. I've talked about him. I praised him on these videos lavishly, and I still really like him going forward. Like him as a number 2 guy. LaShawn McCoy, great matchup this week against Dallas. Chris Ogbonnaya of Cleveland, I talked briefly about him. Again, he's kind of one of these guys that is becoming that dual threat option. Out of the backfield. He doesn't get on the ground. He doesn't get as many touches as Willis McGahee does. But here's the problem with McGahee, and I just released him for Jacquizz Rodgers because, again, I like these guys that get more involved in the backfield with the passing game. Plus, McGahee is getting up there in age. He is just he's a shell of his former self. He's not the back that he once was. He's like, what, 30 spot, 33, 34, something like that. He's in his mid-30s. So Ogbonnaya now is getting a lot of the work out of the backfield. He had 7 catches last week for 61 yards and a touchdown, along with 24 rushing yards. So that's 14 points right there. So again, maybe you look at Ogbonnaya as a number 2 or a flex play if you're desperate. I thought about adding him to the roster, but then I realized, oh, wait, this is Cleveland. This is Brandon Weeden. I think Jacquizz Rodgers is going to be a better play, at least for a couple weeks going forward until Steven Jackson comes back. So I added him instead. But again, he's going up against Green Bay this week. They're going to have to throw in that game to keep up with Aaron Rodgers. So again, I think more of a number 2 or a flex play is how I have to rate Ogbonnaya this week. I don't like Willis McGahee going forward. I really don't. I think he had that good week in the start, and then after that, he completely fell off the board last week. I think Willis McGahee can be dropped safely in many leagues. Alfred Morris going up against the Bears. Again, probably too good of a player to sit. but just temporary expectations on him this week. Again, that Bears defense really strong. But again, you probably can't sit Alfred Morris. So I still like him as a number 2 guy. Andre Ellington of Arizona. Here's a guy that is really intriguing. Again, he's another one of these dual threat backs. And he's getting a lot more touches in the Arizona backfield than Rashard Mendenhall. And he was a guy that I also maybe kind of considered. I wanted Andre Ellington actually as my third running back flex option. I really wanted Andre Ellington, but I got beat out for him on waivers, so I had to pick up Jacquizz Rodgers instead. Because Ellington I think is just going to get better and better in this Cardinals offense. The Cardinals, for me, are a hard team to figure out. One week they're amazing, and the next they're not so much. So it's kind of hard for me to get a reading on the Cardinals right now. But with Andre Ellington, I think this is a guy you can plug in again as your number 2 or a flex running back for at least the rest of the season. He had 7 carries for 56 yards and a score last week, and also caught all 5 of his targets for 36 yards, 14 fantasy points in a standard league. That's huge. So I really like Andre Ellington. Now, granted, this is a tough matchup this week going up against Seattle on Thursday night in Arizona. So maybe playing at home would be better for him. But overall, I don't like the matchup. Maybe you just stash him on your bench from here on out. If you got better matchups at running back, start him. But if you play a flex position, and you don't have Sproles this week, you couldn't get Danny Woodhead or Jacquizz Rodgers or Obanai even, maybe Ellington's a guy you target and try to get him in your flex spot this week just to see what happens with him, because I'm sure the Cardinals will still find a way to get Andre Ellington the football. Maurice Jones-Drew, can't afford really to sit MJD. He had 13 points last week, had a touchdown. Again, but he's going up against this really good San Diego defense who just shut down Andrew Luck and the Colts. So, again, kind of temporary expectations. I can only rate MJD more as a number 2, number 3 play. Love Eddie Lacy's matchup this week. Love Eddie Lacy's matchup for Green Bay going up against that Cleveland defense. Obviously, throwing is going to be tough because, Joe Hayden is probably going to be all over Jordy Nelson because of what he did last week. So sometimes they're going to have to run the football, and Eddie Lacy is going to be the guy to get that bulk of the work. So I like Eddie Lacy this week. You can start him. Kerry Robinson of the Saints had a good week last week. He had 7 carries for 53 yards and a touchdown. But, of course, the Saints on a bye this week, so you can't start him this week. But he's certainly getting more involved in the Saints' ground game, I've noticed. Now, obviously, Darren Sproles is the do-all back that can really, catch passes out of the backfield and play that role. But Robinson is certainly one to monitor. He's certainly one to watch on your scout team. I can't say he's a must-start option yet, but definitely one to watch going forward. Again, I talked about the Carolina running backs. D'Angelo Williams had 11 points last week, but again, going up against the Rams. Maybe a number 2 guy, depending on what happens, there. I don't know what to make of Carolina's backfield. Frank Gore should have another solid week this week. Yeah, you're going up against that tough Tennessee defense, but he's still the guy, so you keep rolling with Frank Gore. I think you should definitely start both Charger running backs this week. You're starting any Charger offensive player against Jacksonville. That includes Phillip Rivers, Ryan Matthews, Danny Woodhead, obviously Keenan Allen, Antonio Gates. Those are the 5 you should probably definitely roll with this week going up against the Jaguars. Heck, even if the Chargers DST is on the wire for a 1-week spot play, I'm doing that this week. You should definitely do that this week because, it's the perfect matchup. The Jaguars offense, outside of Justin Blackman and MJD sometimes, is downright awful. We know that. So even though they gave Denver a bit of a scare last week, we know the truth. The writing's on the wall. So we know this is a great matchup. The Chargers D just shut down the Colts. Now they get the Jaguars. It's a dream matchup. Start your Chargers this week. Now, the big injury news at running back regards DeMarco Murray of Dallas. He did have 10 fantasy points last week, but he suffered a sprained MCL. So DeMarco Murray will likely miss at least a couple of weeks this week. That means that in Dallas, the running back now to own, it looks like, is Joseph Randle. He now becomes the starter in Dallas and certainly looks like he's going to be a pretty strong option for these next couple weeks. Got some great matchups. Of course, going up against Philly this week. I love that matchup for Joseph Randle, so I really like him. excuse me, as a number 2 fill-in play for you as a starting option this week. I really like Joseph Randle. If you can get Joseph Randle off the wire, or if you did already, it's a great pickup and a great start this week. I really like Joseph Randle this week. Lance Dunbar maybe might get involved too, maybe in the passing game as a flex option, but really like Joseph Randle. He could be a guy you can use for the next few weeks while Murray is out. Obviously, you're starting Matt Forte against the Redskins. You're starting your Bears against the Redskins. I've said it on here. The Redskins defense is also known as butter. They don't stop anybody. So you're starting Jay Cutler. You're starting Matt Forte. You're starting Brandon Marshall. You might even be able to get away with starting Alshon Jeffrey as a number 3 receiver because, again, Washington's defense, nothing. So I love the Bears this week. Zach Stacy of the Rams, I don't recommend him this week going up against that Carolina defense. I don't like that matchup at all. Now, Adrian Peterson, normally we can rely on AP every week to be a strong fantasy option, but obviously, in light of what happened with him, in light of the tragedy that we've all heard about, if you haven't heard, his 2-year-old son, not Adrian Jr., but one of his other sons, was brutally beaten, later died from his injuries, and of course, my thoughts and prayers with AP and his family as they go through this tough time. But he only had 8 points last week, and again, that might have been for 2 reasons. Obviously, 1, that's on his mind, as it should be. But 2, the Carolina defense, tough matchup. But this week, he's going up against the Giants. That's a great matchup for him if he plays. He did not attend practice today because of a personal matter. Not sure if it was related to that tragedy that happened, but we'll see what happens with him. You just want to monitor AP's status all week. If he plays, it's a great matchup for him against the Giants. I really like AP in that matchup this week, but thinking about you, AP. After that, it's a pretty big drop-off. Ben Tate, of course, Houston running backs, don't like them this week. Green Ellis against Detroit again. I like Bernard better, so I don't like him. You're not going to have Darren McFadden this week. Joseph Randle, obviously, love Joseph Randle. And Doug Martin going up against Atlanta. Doug Martin had a real rough week last week, only 8 fantasy points, but I really like him going up against that Atlanta defense this week. I think you can definitely keep rolling with Doug Martin this week. All right, moving on now to the wideouts, and boy, oh boy, there is a lot to talk about at wide receiver. Obviously, when it comes to injuries, the big injury at wide receiver is that of Randall Cobb of the Packers. He took a really hard shot to his leg. It was determined to be a broken fibula. From what I've heard, he's out 6 to 8 weeks. He's been put on IR, but designated to return, meaning he could come back. What that would mean that he come at the earliest he'd come back is week 13. The latest is week 15. So for those of you who own Randall Cobb, you have a big decision to make. Do you afford to keep him stashed on your bench for that long, and then put him in when you're in your playoffs at the end of the season, or do you just drop him now and hope you can get him back later? If it were me, if I could, hold on to a roster spot and not lose anyone else the rest of the way, and if I'm pretty sure I'm going to be making the playoffs, I would keep Randall Cobb stashed. But if you're 1-4, if you're 1-5, if you're 2-4, 0-6, if you're right now thinking you're not going to get there, then I think for now it's safe to drop Cobb. You need players now that can compete for you right away, that can get you back in it. So it just depends on where you're at right now in your league and whether or not to hold on to Randall Cobb. So keep that in mind as you go forward. The top fantasy receiver last week was Vincent Jackson. And again, Mike Glennon coming on in Tampa Bay and making Vincent Jackson still relevant. I mean, he was relevant with Josh Freeman as his quarterback, but now he continues to be the guy, and he's still being the playmaker that he is. 9 catches for 114 yards and 2 touchdowns with 23 fantasy points. I'm facing the guy this week that has Vincent Jackson, and even though the guy is 1-5 and I'm 5-1, I'm scared of Vincent Jackson. Okay, I'm scared of that guy that I'm going up against. So I'm really leery of that going into that matchup. I mean, yeah, he might be 1-5 on paper, but I tell you what, he's got a pretty good roster. So again, if he can have the number one receiver from the past week, that's something to really think about. And going up against, again, that Atlanta banged-up defense, it's a great matchup for Vincent Jackson this week. If I was that guy, I'd start Vincent Jackson this week, and he is, and I think you guys should as well, because Mike Glenn is just going to keep feeding this guy the ball, and he's just going to keep turning him into a strong playmaker. So I really, really like Vincent Jackson this week. Again, I mentioned to start the Bears, Brandon Marshall had 20 points last week, 9 catches, 87 yards, 2 touchdowns. Really like Brandon Marshall, like all the Bears this week going against the Redskins. Obviously, Justin Blackmon. Justin Blackmon, no rust on him whatsoever. He was targeted 20 times last week, 20 times for 14 catches and 190 yards. Didn't find the end zone this week, but I tell you what, I was really fortunate to get Justin Blackmon when I did. To get him off the wire when I did. I got him. I picked him up the week right before he's supposed to come back from the suspension, and it has paid off huge because I lost Julio Jones for the season, who was my number one wide receiver. Now Blackmon has taken over that spot as my number one wide receiver. So he's just going to keep getting better and better and better as the season goes on. The Jaguars are obviously going to be trailing in a lot of games. That means one of the most favorite fantasy words we can think of, garbage time. Garbage time stats. Hey, it still counts in fantasy, so it's just going to be – so Blackmon needs to be in your lineups every single week. He has cemented himself as a strong starting option, no rust whatsoever. Justin Blackmon is a stud. Deshaun Jackson, love him this week. Again, that Dallas defense, not exactly stellar, but he's – he caught all 6 targets last week from Nick Foles, 64 yards and 2 scores. Really like Deshaun Jackson this week. Not so sold, though, on Riley Cooper. Because here's the thing about Riley Cooper. I mean, he's been really inconsistent. Obviously we know there's not a real strong elite number 2 option in Philadelphia because Jeremy Maclin's been out for the year. And it looks like Riley Cooper is trying to fill that role. He had as many targets as Jackson, but he only caught 4 of them for 120 yards and a score. That's a 30-yard average per catch. That means that Cooper is more of a deep ball threat and not a consistent, reliable option. Now, if you don't have like a Marcus Colston this week, or if you don't have a Denarius Moore, maybe you can plug in Cooper as a number 3 or a flex play if you're desperate. Because again, I love the Eagles matchup this week. But just be wary, just be tempered. I'm not fully sold on Riley Cooper just yet. I want to see if this trend continues where he gets involved in the offense with Nick Foles at quarterback. If Foles likes throwing to him, and if Foles remains the quarterback in Philadelphia, which I believe he should, then yeah, maybe Cooper is the guy you can pick up and plug in as a number 3 on a week-to-week basis. But for now, at least put him on your scout team at the minimum. If you want to pick him up, I think you can put him in as a number 3 or a flex, but that's all I can really rate Riley Cooper for now until he starts to get more of a consistent rapport going with Nick Foles. Again, Jordy Nelson. I love Jordy Nelson this week. Obviously, with the situation in Green Bay with the receivers out, Jordy Nelson becomes the guy. So he had 17 points last week on 4 catches, 113 yards and a score. Love Jordy Nelson this week. A.J. Green, you want to keep rolling with him this week. Had a touchdown last week, 6 catches, 103 yards and a score. Let's keep rolling with him. And again, the name has come up. And again, I don't know what to make of him. Brandon LaFell, I mean, he's had what? Maybe 2 good games and 3 little games. I mean, he's just too unreliable to trust. He only had 4 targets in that last game. He only was targeted 4 times. Yes, he caught all 4, and he had 107 yards in a score, but he's just not targeted enough. One week you could put him in your starting lineup and he can put up a donut for you. And then the next week he's on your bench and he goes off. I mean, that's how frustrating he is, and I hate players like that. I cannot stand them. So honestly, I mean, with the Rams this week, it's a nice matchup on paper, but I can only recommend LaFell as a desperate number 3 or 4 or flex play. I really can't see him as anything above that because he's just not targeted enough, and so that really is the concern with him. If you want to scout him, by all means, fine. If you want to scout Brandon LaFell and see if this trend continues, hey, that's cool. But I don't want you guys to fall into that trap with Brandon LaFell. I just don't want you guys to do that. I was LaFell a couple seasons ago, and it's not fun, okay? So I can't fully trust him yet until he starts to get more targets. When he starts getting maybe 7, 8, 9 targets, then maybe we can talk more about putting Brandon LaFell as a consistent option. But for now, just can't do it. As I said, I love Keenan Allen going forward. I think he's only going to get better and better. Start your Chargers. He has a dream matchup this week against the Jags. Marvin Jones of Cincinnati, he had 16 points last week because he had a 34-yard rush and 3 catches for 71 yards in the score. But again, not consistent enough in Cincinnati's offense. You want to ignore that performance. Because again, A.J. Green's the main guy. And after that, it's really kind of a big drop-off to see who gets involved. So I can't really recommend him just yet. Larry Fitzgerald, obviously, you want to keep rolling with him. Even though the matchup is tough against Seattle, Arizona's playing at home. And honestly, if I'm being honest, I make NFL picks every single week. I actually think Arizona can beat Seattle at home this week. I know that sounds maybe kind of crazy and far-fetched to say, but playing in Arizona is tough. That University of Phoenix Stadium, I've flown over that stadium before, and I tell you what, that place is huge. And if it gets loud enough in there, I'm sure it's pretty impressive. So I think I honestly can see Arizona winning that game. Their defense has been strong. Their offense good at times, not so good at others, but I think it can be well worked with. So I think we keep rolling with Larry Fitzgerald this week. Denarius Moore had a nice week last week for Oakland. He had 5 catches for 82 yards in the score, but again, make sure you bench Denarius Moore this week because the Raiders are on a bye. Ruben Randall of the Giants. I picked Ruben Randall off the wire for insurance, and I tell you what, he's going to be my number 3 wide receiver this week, along with Justin Blackmon and Keenan Allen, because he has really started to get more targets and more scoring opportunities in the Giants' offense. You know, sometimes the Hakeem Nicks trade rumors are flying for the Giants, where he might be potentially traded to. Victor Cruz is still the main guy, but if Nicks does leave, Ruben Randall becomes a starter right away. And I tell you what, he's definitely shown. Now, the only concern again with Randall is that he's not targeted very much. He only had 5 targets last week, but did have 3 catches, 75 yards with a touchdown, so that's 13 fantasy points. So, and the matchup with Minnesota this week is an awesome matchup. So, if you have Ruben Randall, or if he's someone out there available in your league, great time to pick up a guy like Ruben Randall and plug him in as a number 3 receiver or a flex play for you. Emmanuel Sanders of Pittsburgh, 3 catches for 70 yards in a score last week. Kind of falls in the same vein as Randall. A number 3 receiver, possibly for a fill-in for you if you're desperate. Josh Gordon of Cleveland, obviously you're starting him every single week. He's a solid locked-in number 2 for the rest of the season. Any Broncos, obviously, Wes Welker, Demaryius Thomas, Eric Decker. You want to keep rolling with these guys this week against the Colts. Kenny Stills of the Saints. I'm not so fully sold on him. 3 catches for 64 yards in a score last week, but again, not targeted enough. The Saints are on a bye this week, so you can't have Stills this week available to you, but it's, again, someone you can scout for now, not a desperate pickup right away. Kenbrell Tompkins of the Patriots. As long as Amendola and Gronk are out, Kenbrell Tompkins still has fantasy relevance. So I have him on my bench right now. I'm not starting him this week because I have better options to start. But Tompkins had that late touchdown last week, saved his fantasy day. Going up against the Jets this week, I think you can maybe still look at Tompkins as a number 2, number 3 option for you, as long as Amendola and Gronk are still out. Now, once Gronk comes back, I think it's really going to cut into Tompkins' red zone targets. But certainly a guy you can at least keep stashed for now to see what happens with him going forward. Jacoby Jones came back last week for the Ravens after a long time off. He only had 2 catches for 42 yards in the score, but I tell you what, if that rapport continues to develop again with Joe Flacco, I think Jones could be a potential, again, a number 3 guy who can fill in going forward for you. Michael Floyd of Arizona. Again, you don't know who the number 2 guy is going to be in Arizona every single week. He did have 5 target catches, 44 yards, and a score, 10 fantasy points. Again, but the tough matchup against Seattle, more of a number 3, number 4 option. Tandon Doss of Baltimore, starting to get more involved in the offense as well. He had 4 catches for 99 yards last week. Going up against the Steelers, though, I can't recommend him again as anything more than a number 4 or a flex. After that, big drop-off. Now, Chris Durham of Detroit, with Calvin Johnson kind of status up in the air, not so sure about him. Durham is somebody that's starting to get a little bit more involved in the Detroit offense. He was targeted 13 times last week. He had 8 catches for 83 yards. Again, if you don't have your number 3 wideout this week, like a Colston, a Lance Moore, a Denarius Moore, maybe Durham is somebody you can pick up off the waiver wire and plug in for a 1-week spot this week going against Cincinnati. Again, more of a number 3 this week, or a 4 for Chris Durham with upside, as long as Calvin Johnson status is still up in the air. Again, after that, big drop-off. Andre Johnson, don't like any Texans this week. Steve Smith of Carolina, too inconsistent. Antonio Brown of Pittsburgh, he's obviously the number 1 guy, so you might want to keep rolling with him against Baltimore, but just temper expectations because of the tough matchup. Love Terrence Williams of Dallas, still going forward. Because, again, the matchup against Philly, the fact he's getting involved in the offense, I like him still. Reggie Wayne against Denver, you're still rolling with him. And Hakeem Nicks only had 4 catches for 70 yards last week. I like Randall more than Hakeem Nicks, but you probably can't afford to sit Hakeem Nicks or Victor Cruz for the good matchup this week. So keep rolling with those guys. All right, real quick to close things out on tight ends, kickers, and defenses for the week. Tight ends, Vernon Davis. He's cemented himself as a stud from here on out. I love having Vernon Davis as my tight end. 30 points last week, 8 catches, 180 yards, 2 touchdowns. Really like Vernon Davis. He's a star, and you can want to keep rolling with him this week. The guy you want to really look at now that went off last week for 3 touchdowns, again with the Detroit situation, is Joseph Fourier. Yes, I believe either the brother or the son of Christian Fourier. Went off last week. He was only targeted 3 times, but hey, he caught them all. 3 catches, 34 yards, and all 3 of them went for touchdowns, 21 points. That's what you love about tight ends in the red zone. They can score points. So if you don't have Jimmy Graham this week, if you don't have Michael Rivera from Oakland, Joseph Fourier is a guy you could definitely put in claim for on the wire if he's still out there and pick him up and plug him in. It could be a great option, again, as long as Calvin Johnson either doesn't play or is limited with that going forward. I love Kyle Rudolph's matchup this week. I know Kyle Rudolph is kind of a hit or miss with touchdowns, but he was targeted 11 times last week and had 9 catches, 97 yards, and a touchdown. And with the matchup against the Giants, great matchup. Really like Kyle Rudolph this week. Dallas Clark for Baltimore had 4 catches for 81 yards and a score last week. Again, Clark more of a hit or miss for me. And with that tough matchup going up against Pittsburgh, I can only look at Clark as a number 2 guy or a bye week fill-in for you. Scott Chandler of Buffalo, I don't like him at all. He's only relevant when he scores touchdowns. And yeah, he did last week, but again, can you really rely on that? I can't. I can only rate him as number 2 tight end. If you're looking again for another tight end off the wire with upside, look no further than Timothy Wright of Tampa Bay. This guy was targeted 9 times last week by Mike Glennon, had 7 catches for 91 yards. So again, if you don't have Jimmy Graham this week or Rivera, I think this is a great guy you can put in for a 1-week plug and play at tight end against that Atlanta defense. I think it's a great play for you. Heath Miller of Pittsburgh had 8 points last week. He was targeted 7 times. Baltimore, a tough matchup, but Heath Miller's back. I think you can keep rolling with Heath Miller. Obviously, you're going to keep rolling with guys like Julius Thomas, Jermichael Finley, Martellus Bennett. These guys are must-starts this week based on their great matchups. Jordan Cameron, obviously, is a must-start every single week. After that, though, big drop-off. Don't like the Rams tight ends. Guys like Jeff Cumberland, Jordan Reed. Jared Cook, actually, somebody could probably drop in a lot of leagues because, again, St. Louis's offense isn't doing much this year outside of Bradford and Zach Stacy, so not much there. Brandon Pettigrew, Rob Hausler, don't like them. Now, Jason Witten, a disappointing week this week. Only 3 catches for 27 yards. You wish you'd get more involved in the offense on a continuous basis, but what can you do? But you can't afford to sit Jason Witten against Philly this week. You're going to keep rolling with him. Antonio Gates only had 2 fantasy points last week, but was targeted 8 times. You're going to keep rolling with him against Jacksonville. It's a great matchup. Garrett Graham of Houston. Again, I don't like the Texans against Kansas City this week. And that's it there. Kickers. Kickers that I like this week. Mason Crosby against Cleveland. Love Mason Crosby of Green Bay. He had 15 points last week. He only missed 1 field goal. His long has been 50. He's been solid all year. Mason Crosby, great option for you. He's available in my league. If he's out there in yours, he could be a great pickup for you. Obviously, Nick Novak of San Diego going up against Jacksonville. Great matchup this week. I really like him. Steven Gostkowski of New England, obviously going up against the Jets. Love that matchup. Robbie Gould of Chicago going up against Washington. Love that matchup. Other than that, nothing else really jumps out at me, at least for top options. And then DSTs, real quick. Obviously, the top option this week is the Chiefs defense, going up against that Houston offense. They're going to be dominant this week. If you have the Chiefs D this week, you're going to be rolling in the rewards. Cowboys D against Philly, kind of a hit or miss with Foles. Seahawks D, obviously, against Arizona. You're starting them. Panthers D against St. Louis. Love that matchup. Bears D against Washington. Love that matchup. 49ers D against Tennessee. Chargers D against Jacksonville. Again, a 1-week plug-and-play for you. Ravens D against Pittsburgh. That could certainly be serviceable. Packers D against Cleveland. Great matchup. And to me, that looks like pretty much it. Other ones I don't like as much. So maybe you can get away with the Patriots D against the Jets because the Jets were shut down last week. So that could be a desperation play for you. But other than that, not great matchups this week. All right, guys, that is it. That is it for this week. Breaking it all down, and hopefully you found a guy that you thought maybe could jump out at you, be a waiver play for you this week, a guy that you don't have. Again, not a lot of buys this week, but in the coming weeks, we used to come like weeks 8, week 9, week 10. A lot of teams are on bye weeks, so we're going to start really finding the guys on the wire now in order to prepare for those weeks. So, again, if you guys have any comments or questions, anything, you can leave them on the video below, on the comments, or leave them on the channel. Again, I'll try to answer as many as I can. I got a real busy schedule with work, but again, I always find time to check the channel. So if you guys have anything, please let me know, and I'll try to answer that question, whether it's who to start, who to sit, who to get off the wire, anything. Let me know because, again, without you guys subscribing, viewing, this would not be possible. So, again, thank you guys so much. I do this for you guys, not because, again, I love the game, but because you guys, you're my fuel. You guys, you want to be successful in fantasy football, as do I. So that's why I do this for you guys. So, again, good luck in Week 7 this week. Hope you come through with a big win. And we'll see you again next week when we do it all again. Thanks, guys. God bless, and good luck.